Today on Fear and Greed, the house price boom in Australia is over, with Sydney and Melbourne both going backwards last month. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese hints that the federal election won't be until next year. And the number of COVID cases surge. Plus, the ACCC greenlights the Qatar-Virgin tie-up, and Donald Trump threatens 100% tariffs on some countries. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Monday, the 2nd of December, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, the house price boom is over, with prices across the country flat for the month of November. That is the weakest Australia-wide result since January last year.
And November is all important. It's peak selling season. It's the third month of the spring selling season, to be specific. So it really matters. CoreLogic figures show prices were up just a touch across the country, 22 months in a row of rises, but probably that was the last increase for this cycle. It was only 0.1%. The downturn is gathering speed in Melbourne and in Sydney, while even the hot mid-tier capital cities, Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth, are losing steam. A big reason why prices have come off the boil, capital city listings are much, much higher. In fact, 16% higher than 3 months ago. So Melbourne went backwards during November. Over the past 12 months, it's now off more than 2%. The worst of the capital cities. Sydney went backwards in November. First time that's happened for quite a while. It's up for the full year, up about 3%, but still it went backwards last month. In both cities, and of course they're the two big cities, the number of listings are about 10% above the long-term average. There's one other capital city to go backwards last month, Hobart. For the year, Canberra is also gone backwards. Best is still Perth. In fact, for the year, it's up 21%, but the heat has definitely come out of that market. The other interesting trend from the CoreLogic data, regions have tended to be stronger. The regional index is actually up more than 1%, whereas it's flat in terms of the capital cities.
I'm still just blown away by the Perth performance overall. It is just like looking at when you look at house price growth now for the last kind of 20 years and look at that into the future, you're just going to see this blip, right? This enormous jump for Perth.
Yeah, Perth has a bit of a history of that, though, over the very, very long term. And you get a lot of, because of the mining industry, so it really sort of ebbs and flows a fair bit with the mining industry. So there's been times that Perth prices go through the roof, and other times they absolutely sink much harder than anywhere else.
It's amazing. So really, if you kind of take a step back, the housing market seems to be heading into 2025 not looking so good, then, at least relative to the performance of just the past couple of years, really.
Exactly, and that was demonstrated over the weekend. If we look at the auction results, CoreLogic figures, the last auction weekend of the spring selling season, the national preliminary clearance rate was down to 63.4%. Best way of... What are you laughing at, Michael?
Could you have said that any more slowly just then? I could just see you go, I'm going to nail this first time. Preliminary clearance rate. Like, well done. Well played. Shouldn't have drawn attention to it. I've probably now just jinxed you. Go on.
Absolutely not. The interesting thing was the NPC, National Preliminary Clearance Rate, fell to its lowest level of the year. Michael, you are taking the seriousness out of this very, very important story.
Sorry.
Sydney came in at 65%, very weak for that city. Melbourne was a little below that. Brisbane was just over 50%. Adelaide was 66%. Sounds good, but not for that city. ACT was just over, was about 54%. Basically, what's happening in the market, core inflation's holding up, and the chance of a rate cut any time in the next 6 months seems slim. We kind of saw that even, in fact, on Friday, ANZ, AMP, Bank of Queensland joined Westpac, National Australia Bank, saying the earliest there will be a rate cut is May next year. We have all this extra supply that we've been talking about. There's economic uncertainty and an ongoing cost of living crisis. Put all that together, you really do have a lid on prices. It's not all negative. Well, it's probably quite positive if you're trying to buy your first home. This is all good news, really. But for we homeowners, we think of it as negative. There still remains a housing shortage, and so that'll keep a floor on losses. So it's not as if the experts are saying we're going to end up with prices 10% lower or anything like that. There still is this housing shortage. But just for the time being, I think that boom is over.
And of course, you're talking about interest rate cuts, and politically, interest rate cuts matter, don't they? And if you were the Prime Minister, you would love an interest rate cut just heading into the election, because it makes it look like you are the one delivering to people wanting to buy a home, all that kind of thing. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has indicated that the next federal election, that's my preliminary clearance rate today, will be later rather than sooner, suggesting probably an April or a May poll, right?
So Anthony Albanese has always talked about the idea that he wants 4-year terms and 3 years isn't long enough and he wants to run the full 3 years. That's the background to this. Yesterday, he was speaking on the ABC's Insiders program. He said that Australians have a bit of time before going to the polls. Now, an election must be held by 17th of May. A bit of time, well, if you're going to call an election, January, February, that pushes you out till April, May. At the moment, Parliament is scheduled for 2 weeks in February and the budget is due to be delivered on the 25th of March. Yesterday, Mr Albanese said he intended to go ahead with those two things. You wouldn't deliver a budget, for example, if you're in the middle of an election campaign. So if they did do the 25th of March, that would, let's say 6 weeks from that, you're really at, I think the 10th of May is a Saturday, so you're probably the 3rd or the 10th of May. Anyway, he was also asked about the social media ban for under 16-year-olds, legislation that passed last year. Mr Albanese said he's prepared to talk to anyone about the ban and its implementation, including ex-owner Elon Musk. He went on to say that Mr Musk had his own agenda and was entitled to push that agenda. The Prime Minister also defended Labor's handling of the economy, saying inflation and interest rates go higher earlier in other countries, whereas Australian interest rates didn't actually peak quite as high. And the inference there is that other countries are in front of us in terms of dropping rates, and we're not quite there yet.
It's going to be an interesting budget, isn't it, Sean? Because there will be a lot of pressure on Jim Chalmers not to deliver a budget that does increase inflation or add to inflationary pressure. But a pre-election budget is typically a big spending budget, isn't it?
Totally. So if you come in, remember last week, Deloitte Access Economics said that you're going to end up with a budget deficit of $31 billion this financial year and about $30 billion into the next. So you come into that election cycle, you've got a budget deficit that's around that $30 billion mark. There's no sign of interest rates falling. It doesn't work very well for the government.
Yeah, indeed. All right, let's take a look at local markets. Starting locally, where do we finish up on Friday?
The ASX ended flat on Friday at 8,436 points. That means for the week, it was up about half a percentage point. Certainly was a strong week for the ASX. It's been a quiet few days on Wall Street following last Thursday's Thanksgiving holiday. Brent crude's trading around $72 a barrel. Gold's just under $26.60 an ounce, still pretty high. Iron ore's trading just above $100 a tonne. The Aussie dollar's buying just over 65 US cents. And Bitcoin is fetching $96,500 a unit.
Coming up after the show, Sean, you have an interview coming with Sam Garland, who is the banking and capital markets leader at PwC Australia. This is an interesting chat.
It is. So he's put together the big four banks' results, looked at where they're doing well, where they're not doing well, but where I found it really interesting, we started talking about where do they find growth. Now, these banks are extremely expensive relative to other banks overseas. The Commonwealth Bank in particular, on a historical perspective, is really, really costly at the moment. So we start talking about where do they find their bottom line earnings going forward? Is it in costs? Is it in revenue? It's a great chat.
Yeah, it is a good one. It's coming up after the show. We have plenty still to cover though, Sean. We've got the ACCC giving the green light to the Qatar-Virgin tie-up. We've got COVID cases across the country jumping, and we've got to talk about Donald Trump's extraordinary demand on BRICS nations. That's still to come. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the competition watchdog has given interim approval for Virgin Australia to partner with Qatar Airways, opening the way for the local carrier to start selling long-haul flights.
Tickets will go on sale by Christmas, and Virgin will operate 7 flights a week to Doha using Qatar's planes, crews and pilots. The two carriers have agreed to court enforceable undertakings to protect customers. The competition watchdog said the benefits of the tie-up include increased choice for passengers and about $3 billion in economic benefits to Australia over the next 5 years. I love this story. More competition, lower prices. We've seen that in the domestic market. We've seen that post-COVID in the international market. Now that we've got Virgin selling Qatar flights out of Australia, we're going to see more competition, hopefully lower prices.
Yeah, great for travellers. Online property listings group REA has sued its main rival, Domain, accusing it of infringing on its copyright over property photos and floor plans displayed on its website.
REA, owner of realestate.com.au, has alleged in the federal court that Domain breached copyright by scraping exclusive listings and placing them on Domain's Price Finder and Insight business platforms, according to the Fin Review. But Domain, which is defending the claim, argues that REA's lawsuit is a bid to exert uncompetitive market influence. As the biggest classifieds company nationally, REA is backed by News Corp, while Domain is 60% owned by Nine Entertainment. REA is alleging it owns the copyright for images and schematics for those 181 listings obtained by Domain and used by its analytics service. REA claims it had exclusivity rights conferred by photographers for the relevant images.
Sean, we mentioned this one before. There's been a significant jump in COVID-19 hospitalisations and infections across the country, and health authorities are urging caution ahead of Christmas festivities. It's been a while, isn't it, since we've heard a warning like this, but it takes us straight back to kind of 2020, 2021, those days.
Well, the way I saw this story, not that long ago, the warnings about Christmas parties weren't about COVID. It was about behaviour. But nowadays, it's all about COVID.
See, hey, if you just keep your distance socially,
that's right.
Well, it kind of takes out a lot of other challenges as well, doesn't it?
That's true. So the number of people hospitalised with the virus in Victoria increased by nearly 60% between October and November. The state's latest COVID-19 surveillance report says the number of cases notified to the department has also increased by 44% in the past month, according to AAP. COVID-19 infections have increased in Western Australia after 3 months of relatively low and stable figures, according to the WA Health Department data. Now, New South Wales and Queensland have experienced slight increases to reported infections, but their overall numbers of COVID-19 cases remain low. The Federal Department of Health and Aged Care vaccination rates were down for all states and territories in the November reporting period. That's a concern because obviously over Christmas, when people get together and families get together, you're more likely to be at risk.
Sean, turning to international news now, and Donald Trump has demanded that BRICS nations, now BRICS is a block of countries, and it was originally, wasn't it, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Yep.
But it's expanded since then, hasn't it?
Yes.
It has expanded to include kind of Iran and Egypt and Ethiopia and the UAE, which completely just destroys the BRICS kind of initialism.
It does. I mean, BRICS, doesn't work.
It certainly doesn't. There's too many vowels now.
Yeah.
And so he's demanding that they not create a currency to replace the US dollar. This is the bit that gets me, threatening to impose 100% tariffs on their imports if they try.
So the group of emerging economies has a stated purpose of building up an international finance system that is less dependent on the US and the European Union. Fair enough. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, huge populations. So fair enough. They don't want to have to be so reliant on the US and European Union. The US dollar is the overwhelming currency of choice for international trade, but BRICS nations, particularly Russia, have been pushing to find an alternate. Mr. Trump's threat against the BRICS nations come as part of a flurry of trade-related demands issued by the incoming president from his Truth social media account over the past couple of days. He also dined with Canadian President Justin Trudeau over the weekend. He said that Mr. Trudeau had committed to working to address illegal border crossings and fentanyl smuggling. That's a condition of the US not imposing 25% tariffs on Canada. It is just ridiculous. 2 weeks ago, he was talking about 10% tariffs on China. Now he's talking about 100% tariffs on China if they do something. It must be very hard to be an international diplomat, to know what to take seriously and what not to take seriously.
I wouldn't even know where to start. Sean, one of the big winners from the election of Donald Trump in the US looks like being Rupert Murdoch's Fox News.
Interesting this. It's captured nearly 3/4 of all US cable news audiences in the aftermath of Donald Trump's victory, as liberal Americans tune out of the former reality star's transition to a second term in office. This really hit a nerve with me because when you go out, people no longer want to talk about Donald Trump. And I'm always following Donald Trump for work, But I actually don't want to talk about Donald Trump. And people don't want to talk about Donald Trump. Now, obviously, winners are grinners, so Fox viewers love it. Fox's daily audiences have surged 40% since the November 5 vote, while viewership of the more left-leaning MSNBC, CNN, they've dropped by about somewhere between 27 and 38%. According to Nielsen figures, Fox News averaged 2 million viewers a day from November 6 to 2022. That's up from 1.4 million previously. During primetime evening hours since the election, 73% of the total cable news audience is watching Fox. Just 16% MSNBC, 11% CNN. Winners are definitely grinners, Michael.
It does seem that way. Now, rebel forces have swept into Syria's second city, Aleppo, and were rapidly advancing south after mounting a lightning offensive that poses the biggest threat in years to Bashar al-Assad's regime.
The Syrian army said that the rebels had been able to enter wider areas of Aleppo city, but were unable to secure strongholds because of continued powerful and targeted strikes by our armed force, according to the FT. It added that it was preparing for a counterattack and that its forces had engaged in fierce battles in an area spanning 100 kilometres in recent days. Now, the assault comes as Assad faces growing domestic and external pressure in a country absolutely shattered by civil war. It began in 2011 with the popular uprising. Assad was able to quash the original rebellion with military backing from Russia, Iran, and Iranian-backed groups such as Hezbollah. The fighting, though, in Syria's civil war it's largely diminished in recent years with the remnants of the armed opposition pushed north towards Turkey. But over the past year, Israel, of course, has stepped up its airstrikes on Iranian-affiliated targets in Syria. It's also launched an offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hence, Bashar al-Assad's supporters have been damaged or weakened, and so rebels are now taking advantage of that and creating trouble in Syria.
Yeah, extraordinary times on the global stage, Sean. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Sam Garland, banking and capital markets leader at PwC Australia. Before that, though, we have Fear and Greed's resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, with Fear and Greed the week ahead. What's he covering this week, Sean?
Well, it's a massive week. We've got economic growth figures out this week for the September quarter. That's like the biggest kind of data drop of the quarter. So you can imagine the kook. He's all over it.
Yeah, he hasn't slept for a week in preparation.
No, well, and he won't sleep for the next week.
Yeah, he's very, very excited. That's coming up next, followed by the interview with Sam Garland. A couple of good pieces of listening on the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It is Monday, the 2nd of December 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.